August 15th, 1971. A day that seemed ordinary, but it quietly changed the history of global finance forever. President Richard Nixon appeared on national television and declared, "The United States will temporarily suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold." In other words, the world's most powerful currency, the US dollar, would no longer be backed by real gold. Just a few years later, the price of gold had tripled, while the dollar's purchasing power had fallen by more than 2/3. A piece of paper that once represented a tangible promise was now supported by nothing more than belief. The years that followed were filled with record-breaking inflation. Prices climbed month after month, interest rates soared, and Americans began to realize that their money didn't stretch as far as it once did. Many started to ask, was cutting gold from money a mistake? Economists were divided. Some said it marked the end of fiscal discipline, the beginning of endless money printing. Others argued it was a necessary step that freed the economy from the chains of an outdated system. But there was something almost no one mentioned. When gold was unlocked from money, the poor were the first to suffer. They were the ones who believed that working hard, saving money, and being patient would make life better. They didn't realize that from that moment the cash they saved was quietly melting away. Inflation became an invisible current, slowly eroding their savings, while those who understood how the system worked used that same wave to ride higher. The wealthy bought land, stocks, and real assets. The poor kept their money in the bank, watching its power fade with every passing year. From 1971 onward, the world didn't just enter the era of paper money. It entered a new age of inequality where financial knowledge became the true gold that decides who survives and who gets left behind. Before it was unlocked, the world's money system ran on what seemed like a perfect principle, the gold standard. That meant every single note in circulation had to be backed by a real amount of gold stored in a nation's vault. $1 equaled 1/35 of an ounce of gold, a fixed number that could never change. This mechanism created what people called absolute discipline. Governments couldn't print more money unless they had more gold. No cheating, no endless deficits, no reckless spending. It sounded ideal, but in reality it was like a beautiful suit of armor that was just a little too tight. As economies grew and people needed more money to trade, invest, and build, the amount of gold in those vaults simply couldn't keep up. The result was a shortage of credit. Businesses couldn't borrow. Banks became cautious and consumers stopped spending. And it only took one small misstep. One bank losing liquidity, one company going bankrupt, for the entire system to begin trembling like a line of falling dominoes. Under the gold standard, the Federal Reserve and other central banks couldn't inject money to stop the panic the way they do today. Every dollar they issued was chained to the gold supply. So when fear spread, the system collapsed in perfect sequence, just like clockwork. By the late 1960s, America was trapped in a paradox. To grow, it needed to spend. But to spend, it needed gold to mine, and gold couldn't be mined fast enough to match its ambitions. Meanwhile, the costs of war, social programs, and rebuilding infrastructure demanded more dollars than ever before. So the US government began to bend the rules, printing more dollars than it actually had gold to cover. Other nations noticed. France, Germany, Japan, one by one, started sending their dollars back to the US and demanding real gold instead. Shipments of gold quietly left American ports, signaling that the world's trust was beginning to fracture. A global bank run was forming, not to withdraw cash, but to withdraw gold itself. If this continued, America's vaults would soon be empty. The White House faced a choice: keep its promise to gold or save the entire credit system from collapse. And in the end, it chose to cut the golden chain. The summer of 1971, the situation had reached its breaking point. Nations were demanding gold, and America's reserves were draining away like a leaking tank. Every dollar floating around the world was now just an IOU, a promise that the US no longer had enough gold to keep. On August 15th, President Richard Nixon appeared on national television. His voice was steady, calm, and absolute. I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to temporarily suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold. A short sentence, but one that shattered the global financial order. From that moment, the golden lock was opened. The US dollar, and by extension every other currency on Earth, was no longer tied to any precious metal. At first, the world was in shock. Gold prices soared. Central banks panicked. Businesses didn't even know how to price their goods anymore. But then, something unexpected happened. Instead of collapsing, the American economy slowly began to stabilize. For the first time, the Federal Reserve could inject liquidity. It could print money to stop the dominoes from falling. No longer bound by gold, governments and central banks could now control the money supply as they saw fit. Humanity had entered the age of paper money, where value was no longer guaranteed by gold, but by trust, confidence, and human management. Yet beneath that new trust, a quiet instability was taking root. Because when money can be created freely, very few understand that its true value is slowly being diluted. The wealthy, those who owned real assets, used this new liquidity to buy land, stocks, and companies. The poor, those who believed in saving cash, watched prices climb while their dollars stood still. That was the true cost of cutting the golden chain. It wasn't that America lost its gold. It was that working people lost the ability to protect their purchasing power. After the golden chain was cut, the world entered an era of financial freedom unlike anything before. Now money was no longer limited by the amount of gold sitting in a vault. The Federal Reserve could create money whenever it was needed, lower interest rates to encourage spending, or buy bonds to keep markets from collapsing. And just as many expected, the American economy exploded. The 1980s and 1990s became the golden age of Wall Street. Stocks soared, credit was cheap, and America stood as the symbol of prosperity itself. But beneath the glitter and confidence, a quieter truth was unfolding. Every time the Fed printed money to save the market, the dollar became a little more diluted. Inflation didn't always shout. Sometimes it whispered. You saw it in the rising price of a cup of coffee, in the cost of a home, in the tuition for a child's education. It was a slow erosion, so slow that most people never noticed. The wealthy, who held assets like stocks and property, benefited from the new wave of liquidity. Their net worth rose as asset prices climbed. The working class, who held savings and wages, lost purchasing power with each passing year. The world thought cutting gold loose would make money more flexible, but in reality it made money cheaper and labor less valuable. From here, a dangerous cycle began, a cycle we still live in today. Each time the markets stumbled, the Fed would step in with rescue money. Prices would surge again, debt would grow, until another bigger crisis appeared. Economies looked stable on the surface, but they were surviving on temporary medicine. The more money was printed, the harder it became to stop. Ordinary people believed they were living in a time of prosperity, but in truth, they were standing on an illusion. The only thing they truly owned, their cash, was quietly losing value every single day. Gold may have been erased from money, but we replaced it with something far more fragile. A gold standard of illusion built on debt and belief. More than half a century has passed since the world cut its link to gold. Since then, we've lived in a system where money can be created easier than ever, but real value has become harder to hold on to. Governments can save any crisis by printing more money, but no one can save trust once it starts to fade. Because in this new era, trust itself has become the standard of money. You believe the cash in your hand has value. Others believe the companies they invest in will survive. Markets believe the Federal Reserve won't let the system fall apart, and everything keeps running as long as we keep believing. But with that belief came a growing divide. Those who understood the system, who learned how to move with the flow of money, investing in assets, owning real value, they thrived. Those who didn't, who worked hard, saved in banks and trusted the system, lived inside an illusion of safety. They never realized that in this age, hard work alone is no longer enough. If you don't understand how money works, you eventually become fuel that keeps the system running. Gold once measured trust. Today, financial knowledge is the new gold. The world can keep printing money, but no one can print understanding. And in a time where everything is being diluted, only awareness and wisdom never lose their value. Because one day, when trust in money shakes again, the only people who will survive are those who know how to create real value, even in a world without gold.